All right, we're back. We are COMP125 in the summer 2018 semester at Centennial, and it's week 8, part 1 of our broadcast today. And for the remainder of the semester, pretty much, we're talking about JavaScript from an object-oriented perspective. It says OOP, but it's actually object-oriented programming. With the first part of that, I'm going to hit it a bunch of times. Can I actually get you to just turn the lights off, too? I don't know why today, but they're really bugging me. Off, 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 off. Thank you. That's better. I think it's because of that window. But anyways, so yes, we're talking about object-oriented programming. It's different in JavaScript. You've been taking it with C# up until now. You should know about what objects are, what classes are, what's inheritance. And we're going to be covering that over the next 2 days from a JavaScript perspective, which is very different because JavaScript uses prototypes. So we're using the PowerPoint as a guide, as always. So this is the chapter 7 from the book, which really scratches the surface of JavaScript. I do recommend a really good reference that that you can look up, which is you don't know JS, and it's not Jack something else. You don't know JavaScript. That's what it stands for. Not you don't know Jack. But that's what the funny thing about the book is. If you go, you don't know. You don't know if I can spell today. JS. If you type that in, there is a series of awesome books written by, and this is the GitHub link. I don't want that. But there's 6 books in the series. I mentioned this before. No. And it starts off with up and going with JavaScript and scope enclosures and this and object prototypes. I think this is the one that you want to read if you have a chance to access it. Again, all written by Kyle Simpson. I think he really does a good kind of goes over it kind of really well. Even though it's 2014, I think this is one of the best series of books to learn JavaScript, and they're not big. They're small little books that you can get both in a downloadable format as well as in a physical format, I believe. And they even talk about ECMAScript 6 and beyond. No, you can get it from a lot of sources. I'm just using Amazon as an example. But notice that the first one is like $0. Like, they're not expensive. They're like $8 and $10, right? Canadian or American. So not expensive. You can get them. And again, you can also, there's other sources online that kind of quotes them. I'm going to be using, I'm going to be referencing this book today and maybe tomorrow, and just because I've been using it as a reference and the whole JS series in addition to our book, because again, our book kind of scratches the surface. It really handles ECMAScript 3 more than ECMAScript 5. So that's why I've been kind of pushing to kind of get more modern JS out there for you. Do you need to buy it? I don't think you need to buy it. I'm going to cover some of the concepts here in class, but it'd be nice to have as a reference, the whole series, right? The what? There are PDFs of the book. But again, what you want to do is you definitely want to pay. I'm sure there is a PDF version of the book that's paid. So let us continue. The book reference. I'll do my best. Yeah, I'll do it. So I can kind of go here. I can kind of reference it like what we just did. I can put this link, but I don't put the Amazon link. There is a O'Reilly. O'Reilly really has it. There's also this one that says Gitbook. Not sure if this is the official version. But if you notice, it says download PDF, right? It's online by Gitbook. And if you click read, then you can see that it'll give you the whole version, this whole thing. So this is everything right here. This is actually from the book, this and object prototypes for the most part. So I'll put that link. That's the link that I can put on there for you. There's nothing to download. It's all online, and I'll put that up on Slack. All right, so that's kind of a first place to look, I would say, is definitely one of those. If I can actually look at the right thing, there we go. Yeah, so look there first, and There's some really good references for JS. I think if you ever did a JavaScript interview, the stuff they talk about in the book, if you're interested in being a JavaScript developer, I think it's pretty awesome. So I think that's one of the places you can look, okay? The other two references I'm going to be using today and tomorrow are this from MDN, it's from Mozilla, right? So developer.mozilla.org. One of them is this object reference, which talks about the object itself. So I'm going to put these online right now, as well as this thing about inheritance in JavaScript. These two things that are not covered properly or fully, I would say, in the book. I'm going to put those two links in there so you can always go through and read it on your own. I think they're kind of really, really cool things to look at. And it kind of backs up what I'm going to be talking about today a little bit. We're going to be using those as references. W3 Schools has also a section on objects in JavaScript, but it doesn't go into detail as much as these two articles. And I recommend looking at these two when it comes to JavaScript and inheritance and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's the thing you should look at. So those are the things. And then, so we talked about those three kind of resources, and I put them on Slack. And then I want to talk about the kind of the book, what it covers. What it covers more is, I'm going to skip through here. This idea that, you know, the objects that you create and the objects that other programmers create, they're kind of incorporated into your program. And I think that's true in any language, C#, C++, Java. There's going to be a library of classes that you're going to cover, that you're going to use that belong to somebody else. Somebody made those classes and you're going to use them. So you're going to be a user of those objects. And I mean that in the best possible way. I mean, I don't mean like you're a bad person, but you know, when you're using somebody else's code, you know, you develop your own stuff by using somebody else's. You're basing it or you're deriving your own work from somebody else's. And that's fine. But you also need to create your own. And that's where you become a developer. So the difference, in my opinion, between a developer and a programmer-esque user is someone, imagine if all I do is use somebody else's stuff and I don't make any of my own, or I just make just the bare minimum that I need. I don't know anyone like that, but there are people that, you know, really scratch the surface of what they do and they never contribute back to the community. Trying to contribute back is important, right? So, and understanding how to do that is what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of days. All right, so objects, what the heck are they? When I think about an object before I move on, I think about it in two ways. One, doesn't matter which language, it's a container. So I've got this container, think about it as a box, right? And my box has stuff inside of it. Some of the things it has inside of it are properties, right? And the other things that it might have in it are some functionality, right? The difference between functions and methods, what are they? Do you know? They're the same, except that methods are part of classes. That's really it at the end of the day. They're part of classes. They're part of a class or an object, where functions are free form. They can be not part of or not part of. They're still, methods are functions, but they're special functions. They're functions that are attached to or associated with a class, right? Or some kind of object, okay? So that's the difference between a function and an object, function and a method. Okay, so in JavaScript, remember it's functionally based, a function-oriented language, more or less, where we have our functions or even our closures, the way we made our closure, and we're going to do that in a second, it looks like a big function that we have everything inside of. That's what it looks like, right? And then we have functions inside functions inside functions, and in most languages, you can't do that. You don't normally have that kind of structure. It's usually, here's my outside of there's a class container, and inside the class, I have a bunch of functions, class methods, that's what they're called, right? That we can access. Okay, and there's different ways of accessing them. I'm being very high level, by the way. There's other ways you can think about things. We can also think about classes as a blueprint, right? We can look at a class before, there's no actual, you know, something that's created from classes. Objects are something we create from a class in other languages, right? And some languages like Python, everything is an object, right? But so we can think of a class as a blueprint, right? So I've got this blueprint, I've got this house, you know, I want to make I got a blueprint for a house or a spaceship, and I want to make another house or spaceship for my blueprint, and I just use my blueprint as a guide, and I create another house from it. It's the exact same house over and over again. So templates, this template idea is what JavaScript uses. JavaScript makes a template, and then we use this idea of, or a prototype. JavaScript calls it prototypes, and we use prototypal kind of inheritance to create another object from the original prototype. Okay, so it's kind of a different thing than in C# where we have a class and we inherit. You know, and the inheritance protocol is going to be very different, right? There's two ways of doing it. There's the old way, which I'm going to show you, and the new way, which I'm also going to show you, right? The new way is kind of, I've already kind of showed you already with ECMAScript 6, and we talked about Babel and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to do it again, you know, both ways so that you understand the differences. You might prefer one way over the other. That's fine. Both ways are equivalent, right, in terms of their functionality. Even the ECMAScript 6 class structure, the syntax that we may have talked about already, at the end of the behind the scenes, you know, on the back end, if you will, it's all prototypal inheritance. It's not classical inheritance that you've seen in C# or in Java.
What's the difference?
So classical inheritance, you're going to have this structure where you have a class, and then you create properties, and you know, you're going to create methods, and then you use the extends keyword, or you use the colon, or you know, whatever, and then you know, everything that the other class had, your new class has that prototype as well as everything else you put into it, right? However, the way it works on the back end is different in both languages, right? The way it deals with it when it's compiled, right, and the way the compiler kind of looks at the class structure. Because why are we using classes and objects anyway? We're using it so we can have more reusable code, right? We don't want to repeat ourselves. Remember, we want to keep our code dry. We want to dry out our code. This idea of do not repeat yourself. That's why we use classes and objects. And there are good things about using inheritance, and there's a bad thing about using inheritance. And we may have talked about this before, but let's reconsider this. All right. So you just learned C#. In C# you learn inheritance, a good thing. You make this, you know, beautiful house class, and then I make different kinds of houses. I make a, you know, a semi-detached house, a detached house. I make a, you know, whatever other kinds of houses from my class, my house prototype, or whatever, or blueprint, template, whatever you want to call it. It's the same kind of idea. And then all the other houses are like the other one, the first one, right? So in reality, that might be okay. But from a programming perspective, what if I change the first one, the prototype class? And then there's a cascade of changes that go on through all the inherited classes, especially if you have a class that inherits from a class that inherits from another class that inherits from another class, and all the way down the chain, you have this domino effect of changes that could be breaking changes that could mess up your code. Also, from a maintainability perspective, the more you inherit from another class all the way down the line, the less maintainable it is. It's a mess. We call it like inheritance hell, right? Sorry to say that. So inheritance, depending on who you talk to, is either really good or it's a cancer, right? And I hate to say it that way, but that's just the way it is. People really, either you love inheritance or you hate inheritance. And people who are really good kind of use it when you have to. There's always the way to do it. We use a lot of composition along with inheritance. Have you guys talked about the idea of composition in C#? Where you create a class and you make another class and you create an object of that class as a property of another class. It's kind of like using a class as a property inside your class, but you don't inherit from it. Example would be, I have a vehicle class, right? My vehicle class could be interpreted as an abstract class. And you guys may have not covered abstract classes yet, but think about, there's two types of classes that are typically defined in C#. One of them is this idea of an abstract class, which is a class that's never going to have a concrete object. You never create an object of an abstract class, right? That's the idea behind it. And then you have a concrete class. Concrete class is an object that you would create, or a class that you create objects from. So example of an abstract class might be the person class. Person really doesn't really have a great context. sure, Tom is a person, but I'm a specialized person. I'm a professor, or I might be a father, or I might be a whatever, right? So the idea that, person might be the prototype or the abstract class way up the chain. And then I have me, as another class. Maybe I have another class, professor or father or whatever, maybe both in some languages, because you can have multiple inheritance in some languages as well. C++ is a good example of a language that is okay with multiple inheritance. C# and Java is not okay with multiple inheritance. They don't use multiple inheritance because there's a problem with multiple inheritance. And JavaScript is another one that doesn't really use multiple inheritance, but allows you to use something called mix-ins, right? Which is kind of interesting. Mix-ins. Anyway, so that's kind of the way it works. So now, so Tom might be an object or a subclass of, an object of type professor. But maybe professor has other classes that are part of its properties. For example, I don't know, maybe a professor can teach, and maybe the teaching object, maybe some professors can teach, and the teach capability or behavior is also captured in another class altogether, the teach class, right? But it's part of the professor class. It's not inherited from the so professor doesn't inherit from teach, right? It inherits from person, but it can use teach as to create other things from it. And we'll talk about that later on. Maybe that's not a great example, but we'll get there. And again, the classic example for me is this idea of a deck of cards. Okay, so you have a deck of cards. And for those people, everyone know what a deck of cards is, first of all. So if you don't know what a deck of cards is, then that's a bad thing, right? So a deck of cards is made up of multiple cards. Each card has, maybe we'll do this example today in JavaScript, right? So where a card itself is an object. So a deck is a collection of objects, right? A collection of objects. So instead of me making a deck, just a regular collection, in some languages, Java is a good example, I can make a deck a customized array list object, right? Not a really, it's a list, but it's like a list of cards, right? Because card is a specialized object. Card is a special object, your own object, right? And if I make a list of cards, we can call that a deck. And I can just make it a variable. Let deck is equal to an array of cards, right? And each card would have its own, would be inherited from the card class, which we would create. So again, we're not using inheritance. Deck is not inheriting from card. Deck is using card, right? That idea is composition. We compose the deck by using the card class as opposed to inherit from card to make a deck, right? We don't do that. And deck then would be a container. Okay, so lots of stuff to cover here. I just want to talk a little bit of concept before we moved on, and that's why I don't want to confuse you, but we're going to, best is always to use an example to talk about this. So let's create our project today. So first thing, I'm going to cover prototypal inheritance through the entire 2 days. So again, so it's COMP125 summer 2018. Remember, notice that I'm doing it from scratch because I need to, and it's lesson 8. Well, maybe I do, maybe I don't, but I'm going to. And inside there, just in the beginning, instead of doing it the other way, I'm going to kind of make 2 new folders. One folder is going to be called content. Not going to be much in there. And another one, just to create our structure. I don't need a shortcut. I wanted a new folder. And here's assets. Maybe we'll have some assets this time around. By the end, you will. And then we're also going to have scripts, which is where our stuff is going to be stored, right? So we have scripts. We're only going to be using one HTML page this time around. We're not going to use multiple ones. I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code. One thing I've added to Visual Studio Code to make my Visual Studio Code nicer looking. By the way, let me just move to a different display setting. I'm going to go to, what am I looking at here? Am I looking at the right thing? I am. I'm going to go to about 125% just to make it easier for you guys to see, which makes my screen bigger a little bit, up here bigger. So So one thing to note is I've added in a set of extensions, which I recommend. One of them is if you type in Vue, right, for your Visual Studio Code, there's going to be this VS Code, Vue VS Code extension pack. It was originally created for Vue.js, which is a front-end framework, right? But it includes a bunch of other extensions like VTour, Vue snippets, Prettier, formatting toggle, bracket pair colorizer, bookmarks, Jumpy, npm IntelliSense, ES6 snippets, and a bunch of other ones. All right, I think it's a pretty good extension, to be honest with you, and you can see that it's been downloaded a bunch of times. So what does it do? Well, it formats stuff for me, which you'll see in a second. So I'm just going to drag and drop this folder in here while I start, and we're going to make our quick new file, which I'm going to use as index.html. Again, just watch right now. I'm going to make a HTML file really quickly, just like we've done before in the past, right? So here is this stuff here that we've been using with my document, and I'm starting anew for a couple of reasons. So please bear with me while you see what I do. All right. So I'm gonna call this COMP125, OOP, which is what we're going to start off. And there's still going to be a JavaScript section. So here's my CSS section. I can do it properly. CSS section. That's why I don't type this. I'll do this very quickly, and then we'll be done, right? Why I recommend it. That's why I recommend that one. View. Yeah. Yeah. So this one here is the basis. This is our template, and of course, what I want to have is a script that's in here. But I'm going to do it slightly different, of course, because I got to complicate your lives just a little bit. So what I want to do is we're going to have, imagine we're building a big application. So we're not just building this small little thing for index pages or pages that we've been building. We've been really doing like this baby program over the last 7 weeks, right? That's what it is, a little baby program that doesn't really work in the real world, okay? But here's something that I would do if I was going to build a, kind of a real web application. I probably create this new folder structure, and one of the structures I'm going to put in place is the idea that I'm going to have a set of core scripts that I'm going to use. So before we put our script inside the scripts folder, now I'm putting it inside the scripts folder, but inside a core folder, because I'm going to organize my scripts in different folders. Okay. So my core folder is where my main app.js is going to be. That's where it's going to be. It's not going to be just in the scripts. So I'm changing my folder structure a little bit. I'm still going to do the iffy. Okay, so I'm just kind of typing as I go. And again, if I type in, notice my coloration now is different because of the stuff. You may like it, you may hate it, by the way. But I kind of like it because it kind of makes it fun to look at, right? It's colorful. It's beautiful now, right? It's pretty, right? And that's what this whole prettier formatting stuff does in the bottom. If you notice on the bottom, there's these two little options here where it says prettier, and there's also formatting, which you can turn that on and off, right? On the bottom when you set prettier up. And so we have our iffy, right? And this is in our core. We also have like our traditional start function. So here's our start function, right? And we also have some kind of main function, right? So function main that we're going to use, right? And we might have a couple of other functions, but for now we're going to use these two. I'm going to be using start for initialization. Any kind of initialization, variable initialization that I do, everything's in start. Okay, so this I'm going to use, again, I'm using document this extension for Visual Studio Code, right? So here I'm going to be saying something like this function it will be used, or is used, let's say, used for initialization. Okay, and this function is where all the fun happens, right? So this function is where all my functionality for my code goes through. So this function is where the main functionality for my app or our web app is happening. And again, I'm very kind of informal here when I'm talking about this. You can also remove, if you're not happy with the extra spaces, you can remove these totally fine. I like to keep them because later on they'll be in use. But I kind of describe what these functions are going to do beforehand, right? And then, of course, I'm going to call the start function upon load, right? Which we've seen before, which is nothing new. So it's window. You can use onload, or what I prefer is add event listener with the load events, because what's the difference between onload and add event listener? What's the real reason for using this? Anybody? Some people still not know. No one knows? I can remove an event listener, but I can't remove an onload. Right? Onload doesn't give me an event listener, add an event listener. I can register an event listener, and then with remove event listener, I can remove it if I need to from a memory management perspective. Onload, can't do that. I can't do unload, right? There's no function like that. Or remove load, or deload. There isn't anything like that. Whereas add event listener and remove event listener does exist, and that's the reason why I like to use add event listener over onload, right? Or on events. Okay. Notice my function main, it's not being accessed. And just to do what we did before, so again, console log, just to set up, I'm going to use backtick, and I'm going to say something like %C, we're going to say, start applications, app initializing. That's what we're doing here. And then we're going to use a comma, and we're going to use some CSS for this thing. Let me open this up so you can see it better. Maybe some CSS in there where I'm going to say font weight is bold. We've covered this before. And my font size, maybe it's 20 pixels. I'm not going to change the color. All right. And that's this, my app initializing. And I'm just going to take the same thing here. And I'm going to go when I get to main, right, in my main function. Notice also that this block is highlighted, which is kind of a cool add-on. That's the extension working, right? This block part. So where my app is actually started here. This is where my app actually starts, right? My app's initializing in start, and my app started here in main, right? You can. This backtick, you'll figure it out. Look at the videos. You maybe missed the class, but it's the new template way of doing things, right? So template strings as opposed to regular string, like double quotes. All right, and we're going to call at some point, we don't know when, but we're going to call our main function from our start function, right? Because first we initialize, we're done initializing, we call main, right? And then main happens. So this linkage that we're forming is something where we set up our program to do certain things. So now what we should see is app initializing and app started. Yeah, would you agree? If we connected this this app.js to our index.html, which we'll do here, right? So we'll go here and we'll say script, and then we'll say source. Then it's going to be /scripts core app.js, right? So again, we're looking in the core folder. Think about this as the core module, And if you want to take it further with our core module, you can always go back to my app.js and add that in. So you can say something like, well, let's just say core is this. We'll pass core into our function, and then at the end, somewhere down at the bottom, we'll pass core back out again, right? Just like we've done in our module syntax, right? Which is where core is equal to some kind of object, right? That's what we're saying here. So that's really the idea, where this is the core module, all right? And what I've done is I've encapsulated all of my functionalities so that when you go to the console, all you see is core. And right now, core is empty. There's nothing on it. If I want to add certain functions to core, if I want to call the main function again or something else through core, I could do that by attaching it, like we've done before, where I say core main is equal to main. Okay, as an example. All right, so this is going to be our landscape from now, and this is going to be our starting point, right? And it's a little bit different than what we've had before. Okay. Our index.html page is going to be very simple. All right. It's going to be used for examples and demos more than anything else. Okay. When I add Bootstrap and all that stuff to it, I'm going to use. We've been using npm until now. Yeah. Yes. Not today. All right. Today is new, like I said. So we're going to add something new to it. I'm going to continue to move you forward. Remember, we talked about a couple of things that I'm going to get you to use a bunch of tools in this course, because JavaScript, to stay up with modern JS, you need to know tools, you need to know packages, you need to know all this other stuff, or else I'm not really teaching you JS. I'm teaching you how to manipulate the DOM the old way. All right, so what I want to do here is I want to go into, I want to look at my command prompt. And in my command prompt, we all have Node.js right now, right? So this is my little command prompt here inside of VS Code. And what I'm going to do is install a new module called Yarn, which we've talked about. So npm install yarn -g. All right, please do that.
Even though we don't have this product yet, you said you were going to upload it.
-g is global, right? So you're installing a module that's global. It has nothing to do with my project, okay? And what I'm going to do here with Yarn is similar to what I've done with npm in the past. Yarn is the sleek younger sister of npm. Maybe the younger brother might be a better example, but anyways, a sibling of npm. So if I go to Yarn, if I can type Yarn, we've talked about this before, but hey, let's go to Yarn, which is a package manager, again, similar to what we've seen before. It's a hot new way of using npm. We still use npm, but we're using Yarn as a kind of a front end to make npm faster and better. So, and you'll see why Yarn later. But Yarn is kind of the new way of doing things. Okay, cool. So Yarn. So now that we've got Yarn, and I think I already have it inside of our, I think I've talked about it before, way back up here, where we talked about in general, where I talked about other things way up here. There's Yarn. See, I've already talked about it. So if you wanted to look at that up on Slack, the link for Yarn is already up here. Okay, that's where it is. So the command for Yarn is as follows, right? And it's yarn add, right? Instead of install, npm install. Doesn't matter what package manager you have. It's the package manager's name, space, and some kind of behavior, right? An example will be an action you want to take. But the action I want is to add something. For npm, the action I want to do is install something. It's the same thing, right? Just Yarn uses add, npm uses install. So I'm going to say yarn add, or if I was going to add something. If I want to initialize my dependency manager, which I've done with npm before by doing an npm init, I can just do yarn init, just like I've done before. So yarn init is the first command. Enter. And it's going to step you through this. It's going to step you through this batch file, right? That basically asks you what you want your project to be named and so on. I'm going to just type it again because Yarn and npm doesn't like capitals. I'm just going to reduce my capitals to lowercase. That's all I'm doing here. I'm just renaming my project. Okay, here's my version. So whatever my version is called, right? So version 100 is my first major version. I could also change this to 001 if I wanted to. It's perfectly fine. What's my description of my package? So my package description. So COMP125 demo for OOP, right? That's my package description. My entry point, don't worry about this right now. Leave it as index.js. We don't have another one because your package isn't going to have an entry point necessarily. If I have a URL, if I have a repo, I don't have one yet, but I could make that, put in there. The author is me. I usually put that in there. The license I'll accept if I was going to share this package with somebody else. It's not private, and that's it. Right? So just kind of step through it, answer some questions, and I'm good to go. All right? In your case, you just change your name with my name, and then later on you can change the URL. What does this do? It creates a package.json file just like we had before with npm. Same thing, right? Name, version, description, main, author, and so on. Okay? That's all this does. And remember, we use package.json as a dependency manager. It's a manifest for our application to see what my application depends on. I need, remember, jQuery. I need Bootstrap. I need Font Awesome. Those are dependencies for my project so that it looks nice and functions the way we want, right? We've been using jQuery so far, but that's what I've been doing, okay? Cool. So let's clear that up. So here, clear it up. And now I want to start adding. Once I have my package.json file, I can add packages through Yarn. And again, it would be like yarn add. And I don't have to put -- save like I did with npm. So yarn add, and this if I want to use jQuery. I also want to add Bootstrap. I also want to add Font Awesome. Okay, I also want to add, we know for Bootstrap, we know that we need to use another package, popper.js, right? And that's all modules we need for our application to run, because we want to have Bootstrap functionality. We want our application to look nice, and we don't want to do any CSS, right? That's the idea here. If I press enter, it's going to go out to the web, grab all that stuff, and install it. Done. That's way faster than using, I've noticed the speed for, as an example, is way faster than NPM, although it's using NPM on the back end. So it just optimizes. So that's the thing. And we also want to have our type definition libraries to give us good code hinting. So we'll do the same thing with yarn. We'll say yarn add at types. This is the same stuff. At types jQuery, right? As an example. We're probably not going to program in Bootstrap, so I'm not going to add the type definition for Bootstrap, but jQuery is pretty cool. And in this case, we want to have a - dev extension, which creates development dependencies, right? So we don't say save.dev, we just say --dev for development, right? And I press enter, it adds in the jQuery definitions. And notice in my package.json file, it does the same thing, but breaks it up into dependencies, which is stuff we need for a project, and dev dependencies, which is just stuff we use for creating our application, all right? We don't really need it, but it's really nice for us to have, kind of thing. All right, so that's kind of the stuff we've done. And so our packages has everything inside of it. Node modules, just like before, has everything in here, right? Typically, when we want to put up stuff up to GitHub, we want to ignore node modules, right? So in GitHub, which we haven't really talked about, you can create something called a .gitignore file. Let's do that now. So in the root, I'm going to create a new file called .gitignore, right? And the .gitignore file, you can include any folders or files you do not wish to include when you put things up on GitHub. If I wanted to, I can ignore the whole node modules folder by just listing it here, right? However, right, we're going to use node modules, to make our project run on GitHub pages, right? And it needs to know where to look. So for now, we're not going to do this, but later on we will, all right? Let's just use GitHub, gitignore. We'll put it in our project, but not use it yet, okay? I'm just going to put it in our project. A gitignore file basically allows you to ignore stuff you do not want to put on Git. And some good examples of that is things like, if I want to not include things like copyrighted images, right? So I don't want to put my images up on GitHub. I only want to put my code up on GitHub because that's my backup for my code. I don't need my whole project, including the images. Maybe I want to keep those images somewhere safe where people can't steal them, right? So then you can ignore those. You can put that in the gitignore file so it ignores all the assets images, as an example, right? We don't have images, but we will. So I'm going to put in a new folder called images in our new structure. That's our assets images, right? And again, in our content, we don't have anything, but we're going to put in a new file, app.css, right? Where right now we'll just say your custom CSS goes here. So that's where that's going to be. That's all that is. All it is just placeholder stuff right now, right? And in my index.html, I got to link everything in. All right, two things. So this down here in my JavaScript section of my index.html, in my new template, right? This is the new template we're going to be using from now on. This is my application scripts. That's what this is. And there's going to be another section down in here, which is my, JavaScript libraries. They're third-party libraries. You can actually put that in there, third-party libraries, right? Because that's what they are. They're not yours. They're somebody else's, all right? And why do I do this separation? Because sometimes when you program, especially when you develop, you want to kind of give separation. Eventually, we won't need any of this. We want to have third-party libraries because they'll be incorporated into our script. Or we may use a CDN, a content delivery network link, so we don't have physical scripts in our code, just our own, which makes sense, right? All right, we need a link, first of all, to our CSS. Let's do that part. Our style sheet is going to be inside of our content folder. So again, we're going to say /contents and then app.css. Again, in the past of // slash or // was different. / is in the same folder, right? You're looking at a folder that's in the same folder as you are right now, right? / is the root of your application, okay? So we're going to use the root of our application this time around. And so we've got these two, but now we have to add in the stuff from Bootstrap. And just like I did the CSS section, this is our app style sheets, right? Going further, and these are our, third-party style sheets. Okay, that's what those are, and we know what they're going to go in there. That we're going to get Bootstrap and Font Awesome, right? So we're going to say link, and inside there we're going to go /node modules, just like we've done before. We're going to say the first one is Bootstrap. There's Bootstrap. And we're going to go into dist CSS, and then bootstrap.min.css, just like we've done before. Okay, and then for Font Awesome, just like we've done before, link, and then it's going to be /node modules /font awesome /css. By the way, just go back up a second. They also have other things, less and sass, these two things, which is like compiled CSS. We're going to go into CSS for now and min.css. Okay, those are the two. And that's the two, those are the two we need along with our other ones. So I'm just separating it a little bit to make it look nicer in our templates. And then down in here, inside of our library, same thing. We're going to use a script tag with a source attribute, and we're going to say /node modules, and then we're going to go with jQuery first, right? Where it's dist, and then min.js. That's the one we want. And then after jQuery, we're going to go with our node modules, and we're going to say that it's going to go to Bootstrap, and then dist, and then JS, and bootstrap.min.js. All right, so there we go. So those are the things we've done before, just doing it in a different way. All right. So kind of cool. Those are the things we're always going to need in all of our application parts, and it's a good review of what we've done up until today. Right, that's what we've kind of done. I haven't really changed much. I just added Yarn as a different package manager. And we've talked a little bit about how to separate our app.js a little bit differently in terms of our core functionality, with our start function being more for initializing. And our main function is where all the fun happens, where everything happens inside of our app, right? All right, let's go back to this part. Okay, we're kind of not done. We still need a couple of other things. We need something where we show our stuff. And so for now, we're going to have an H1 tag, which we're going to say, COMP125, as an example. And we're going to add the Bootstrap around it in a second. COMP125. Actually, let's do that first. Let's do the Bootstrap part. So the Bootstrap stuff, we're going to have a nav bar, right, that we're going to have in here. Not next week, but the week after. We're going to hit Ajax, right? We're supposed to hit Ajax the week after. Next week, if you notice on the schedule, so just going back to our original schedule for this course, let's take a look at COMP125. And if you look at that was from lesson 1. If you looked at our schedule, and I'm bringing this up because we're talking about one thing, but we really have to kind of keep in mind what we're going to be learning over the next couple of weeks. Notice that week 8 is manipulating data in strings, and then week 7, see what the week is? Week 7, there's a midterm test, and we should have started using object-oriented programming. So week 8 is really week 9. We're a little bit behind in terms of what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to have started using OOP last week, but I really used last week as a review session as well as a test, and I think it was good that we did that. We're not that behind, though, and manipulating data in strings, we took some of that and put it last week. Remember, because we used regular expressions. So we kind of did a little bit of the stuff we were supposed to be doing this week, last week. We're still kind of on track, and we're not really worried too much. But notice Ajax is happening like way back down there. Like web page with Ajax is week 11, and I'm probably going to hit it the week we get back from mid-semester break. So mid-semester break is, I don't know why it says mid-semester break, but it's supposed to be, say, mid-semester break. That must have been like me asleep that day. But anyways, after mid-semester break, which is not next week, but the week after, that's when we start off managing state information and security, which is supposed to be, it says Chapter 9. But Chapter 9 is actually what we're doing with manipulating data, strings, and arrays. So that's kind of weird that that was put in there. When we get back from break, I'm going to give you your assignment number 3. So today there's no assignment. I'm not going to give you a brand new assignment today. We're just talking about OOP today and tomorrow. All right. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you because just to give you on track. So I might bring up Ajax a little faster because this is a pain in the ass for us to always have to put in our nav bar in every page, right? I don't want that. I want to be able to kind of use Ajax to get our nav from a file, right? Which is more user realistic, all right? So again, I'm going to go to Get Bootstrap, just like we done last time. So Get Bootstrap, I'm going to grab some components. So if you look at components, there's the nav component that I want in Bootstrap. Here's my nav bar. And there is an example right here, which I'm going to copy. And I'm going to go here and paste it. And then I'm going to just fix it up, just like we've had before. Now you say that I'm kind of redoing, but there's a reason for all this, and you'll see soon. Okay, so I don't care about the dropdown, so I'm getting rid of the dropdown. This is another opportunity for you guys to see it again, by the way. And here's an example of having multiple forms in one class. Normally, we talked about it a couple weeks ago. We said, hey, typically we only have one form. Here's another form. This is the search form. And what we're doing here is we don't need it. We're excluding it. But we could make that operational if we wanted to as well. Here's a couple of nav items, and the one that's disabled we can get rid of. And we don't care about our nav link having this span, right? So we'll get rid of that span. And this whole span here. But what we will do is we have 2 links, one that's home and one that's another link. And we're going to make them internal to the page, just like we've done in our exam. Exam was a good example of where we had a link at the top for our home, and then you clicked on it, and it went to another part of our page, right? So we'll have 2. We'll have a home and a contact, all right? Just like we did on the exam. Okay, so there's our contact. Here, notice that it's going to our home. We can also put, our index.html in here. This will change. And this maybe will be inside of our page. We'll have an area that's contact where we put the hashtag. It means go to the area that has an ID of contact. That's what it means inside of our page, right? And again, I'm going to put in some font awesome, right? So it's going to be an I tag. And inside the I tag, there's going to be a class of FA home, FA large font that's home, right? And I need a space between the I tag and the home to give us that separation. Otherwise, it's too close together. And I want to do the same thing. I'm just going to copy paste here. I want to do the same thing with our contact. We're just going to use the message one that we did before. So instead of FA home, I believe it's FA message, I think, or comment. That's it. And that's our page. So that's really the page. Notice when I press save, what it's doing is prettier, or formatting is taking effect and formatting my page automatically. And that's why it's doing all these separation the way it is. Okay, so we've got our nav bar. Yay. And I also want some kind of way of displaying some information. I'm going to put some information inside of a, oh, by the way, we also have this, sorry to interrupt, nav bar. We're going to call this COMP125, right, with the hashtag. That's fine. So it doesn't really do anything right now. It just has a little COMP125. I also, in your exam, I actually put a little globe in there on the left. You can use font awesome for that instead of using a some kind of logo. I'm also going to use the navbar dark theme. I want a dark theme instead of the light theme. That's what I'm doing here. And also notice that my links, see where it has MR auto, my links will be left justified. I want them to be right justified. And we can use ML auto for that, right? Okay, that is my index page right now. And one thing I also wanted to add in, that's why I'm telling you not to follow me here, but just to wait till I'm done. My Jumbotron. I want to add this Jumbotron in, just like we've done before. I want to take this whole thing, and I want to put this Jumbotron inside of a div tag that has a container in there. So container, and then the Jumbotron will be in there. So what I want to do is after my nav bar. So this is my main nav. So I'm going to kind of draw that out. So let's say main navigation, if I can spell. There we go. I cannot spell. I never can spell. And here is my main content, right? I don't have that main content yet. And let's say further down, there's an area that's, footer, so footer contents. Maybe this is even the main navigation, and the main navigation is inside of a header. We don't have that yet, but I'll do that. So I'll say this is our app header. Thank you. Would have figured that out, I think. And so in the header, typically you have HTML5 header, and then what you want to do is you want to move all this stuff, all the navigation stuff into that header, just to be contextual, not for any other reason. So take that nav, put it in the header, right? And then now we'll reformat the page. Sometimes you have to do that too. There we go. So our header is inside of our nav is inside the header, main navigation inside the app header. Then I have my main content here, right? And then I have my footer. So let's put our main content. Here's my main with an ID of main content, right? And my footer, right? That's my app footer. And that's where my nav bar bottom is going to be. This is my nav bar top, right? This is my main content. My main content is going to have my, undo. Main content is going to have my Jumbotron, but inside my main content, I'm also going to put a div tag with a class of container, right? There we go. That's how it should look. And again, I'm just making this semantic. Yeah.
Or is being able to put like div.container, is that part of the package?
That's part of VS Code. VS Code allows you to do something called emit. Remember? I don't know if you remember, but emit basically allows you a shorthand. So if I put the tag dot means tag with a class. Tag with a hash, tag with an ID, which is what I've done, right? And then you can do other things. All right, so that, yeah, so this is Jumbotron, and then instead of hello world, we're going to say COMP125, right? OOP template. That's what we're using here. I don't care about paragraph tags or a horizontal rule in there, so I'm going to take all this stuff out for now. And we're going to do some examples. When I target stuff, I'm probably going to be targeting something in the Jumbotron, just so we can see what we're doing, okay? That's what it's going to be really for. I also want to have a footer, a nav for the footer. And if you notice further down, we've talked about this before. If I go to navbar, again, this is just a rehash of what I've talked about before, so I apologize for people watching this video. But if you scroll down with Bootstrap, Bootstrap allows you to do some really cool things. Let's go back down here. They have color schemes and containers. And one of the things is this idea of fixed top and fixed bottom, right? So fixed bottom. I want to do this, but I also want to give myself space at the bottom, right, of my page. So I may have to add a little bit of CSS. So I want to take this nav. I want to put this inside of here. And I also want to think about that this nav bar, fixed bottom, nav bar light, background light. I can make this dark if I want, or light, or some other color, right? For now, it's fine. And inside here, I want to have some just simple copyright stuff, right? So something like an H4 tag that has some copyright. So I'll say and copyright symbol. That's what that is in HTML. Copyright 2018. All rights reserved. Don't copy my video. I'm joking. And yeah, there's this part that's kind of part of our footer. And we have, I want to make it, one thing that makes this bottom is this fixed bottom. That's that part right there. You can also make it something called sticky top, right? Sticky top means if I scroll like you did in the exam, if you notice, I had a sticky header. So if I scroll in the exam, it doesn't scroll my header. I always see my nav bar. My nav bar doesn't go away. It's kind of a thing people do. I like that. So I'll have to put a sticky top in there, but I need to put a little bit of CSS along with that because we're going to have a problem, which you'll see in a second. All right, so sticky top is cool, and I want to put that right in my nav bar. So notice that says nav bar and then sticky top. So that's what I want to put in here. Yep. All right, I think I got most of it that I want to start with. And let's test it before I put it up online. So I'm going to go to our PowerShell here, and I'm going to go light-server, and let's see what I got. Okay, so if it works, then we're good. And notice that why do I need this be pushed down? Well, a couple things. I got this, the home page and the contact page. Contact page doesn't go anywhere right now, right? It does show that on the link on the URL, but the home page is basically up here. This is where the Jumbotron is, and I want it to be pushed down about 40 to 50 pixels, right? Because otherwise the sticky top is going to hide my Jumbotron, which I don't want, which means I need custom CSS, right, in my CSS page. So I'm going to go back here in my app.css. I'm going to put in here a body tag. So my body is going to have a couple of things that I want, right? Inside my body tag, I want a margin top and a margin bottom, right, of about, I don't know, maybe 2M. Okay, so I'm going to say margin dash top. We'll say 2M, and margin dot bottom. Do you guys know what M's are? Please tell me you know. You do? No? M's. An M. You know an M? An actual letter M, right? That's how big they are. So depending on your font size for your page, so the reason why we use M's is because they're relative size, right? If I'm on a mobile device, the size of an M might be different than if I'm on a desktop device, right? So it's a flexible unit. You can also use percentages if you don't like M's, right? Margin top, 1%. Margin bottom, 1%. But however, we don't know height. We know width. So that's why M's work better. All right, so what does this do? If I save this, and if I go back, you can see now that it's pushed down, but so does this. Look, all of this is pushed down, right? It's almost like I can't put that because this is what I wanted to show you this for a second. But see what it does. It adds about this much. And I need more than that. I need about this much. That's why I'm using body for now. So 2Ms was not enough. Let's use something like 4Ms. And you're going to see this in a second. So you can see now that that's a bit too much, right? Because it's going to cover more than this. But if I want a little bit of separation between my nav bar and my Jumbotron, then this is okay. So about 4M is about good, right? And also at the bottom it adds 4M, which means that it won't go lower than about here, okay? Okay, so I don't want this here. I don't want this in my body. I want this for my nav bar. And what I've done is, if you notice inside my index.html, a bit of HTML stuff, I've got my header, right? So I can say, well, for my header, any header, I want to give myself a space. So I can say that in my CSS, this will be my header. So I'll say header. So I want to push my margin top down by, sorry, let me go to do that again, not the header. In my main content, I'll be okay, Tom. Yeah. My main content, in my main, with an ID of main content, so I'm going to say hashtag main content. That's what I want in there, right? I want that pushed down. So I'm going to say hashtag main content, right? It's going to be pushed down by 4Ms. And I don't want the bottom to have 4Ms. I mean, I could, but I do want my footer, right? So any kind of footer tag. And this isn't great because if put any footer, if maybe I have other footers for other reasons, it may not be a good idea to do this. So what I probably want to do is give my footer an ID. We'll just call this main footer, right? I know which one I'm talking about. So that's main footer. Back to CSS. So I'm using an ID instead of a tag. Main footer, and I'll take this part here and I'll put it in here, right? That's what I really want. I want my footer to have a bit of margin on the bottom, so margin bottom, right? So that way I can see my footer. Well, actually, we have to test that. I don't know if that's correct. Let me see if I may not be doing this right. Maybe I want my main content exactly to have a margin bottom. We'll see, because then my main content would push my footer down, right? So maybe I don't need my footer at all. Yeah. Yes. I'll be okay. I was right the first time. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, what does this do? Well, that means that now you can see that there's a bit of separation here, right? Now, if you're not happy with how much space is in here, you can certainly change it. I'm okay with this, but you have to be okay with this. What this means, if I scroll in eventually, it's not going to ever go like up here. Even though this is a sticky top, if I have other information, and let's just add some information in here. So I'll add a p tag inside my main content. So in my Jumbotron, just to give you some templating, I add a p tag. Inside there will be a lorem text of about 400. I'll do it again. P text with lorem text of about 400. Arg. P tag lorem 400. It didn't work this time. Yarg. Okay, P. Lorem 400. There we go. All right, and what this immediate effect would be is you're going to see this, right? Some stuff, a bunch of text, and you can see now that I scroll, oh man, what happened to my sticky top? Well, it's not a sticky top, it's the top, right? But this is what happens here. Notice that I have a bit of separation here, so I can actually scroll up. This is good. 4Ms is about right at the bottom, right? But you know, you may not be happy. So I want to make this a sticky top. How do I do that? Going back to Bootstrap, it's just sticky top. If you go to Bootstrap. So we have sticky top, right? And somehow my sticky top didn't work, right? So we tried to activate it, but it didn't work, right? Whereas my fixed bottom worked fine, right? Notice my fixed bottom, fixed top, that's a different thing. So if I go fixed top as opposed to sticky top, let's go up to the top here. And let me just undo this part, and so you can see the top. So this part here, my nav bar, it's a sticky top. If I say fixed top, like this, if I go back to here, and now if I scroll, I think this is what I really wanted, right? So now notice that there's little separation here. Look, and it kind of disappears. So I can scroll down and up, and I don't lose my page on the top or the bottom. That's what I really want my page to be like going forward. Okay. Are you with me? Okay. The other thing is, what I did was in the exam, I also added a kind of a 80% opacity. So you can kind of look through to see if there's other content. That's what I wanted to do, right? So what you can do in CSS is, so my margin is correct, but I want to target my nav. So any nav tag, anything. This is a good use of it. I want to say that my opacity is something like, 0.8, right, for my nav, and then that should provide this look and feel to it. Now, you may not like this, but what it does allows you to kind of see through this. You may not like, but it's kind of a neat little effect, right? Okay, so it's all CSS. Our CSS is done. This, my friends, will be our template, right? Let me stop this. And we'll put it up on GitHub. A little slower than I thought I would be. I thought I could probably get this off within half an hour, but it took about an hour because of my explanations. I do apologize. But let's just do this. So we'll say git init, git add dot, git commit -m, initial commit. You can see I'm still typing, and that's totally fine. Okay, so I did all that. That's all done. And now what I can do is I can go up to GitHub and Centennial, and we'll create a new template. It's a new. And we'll say COMP125, summer 2018, lesson 8. And just like we've done before, we'll grab all this stuff, right-click down here, and press Enter. And if you've done it for the first time, you set your stuff up. If you haven't done it, you have to do this, right? And this sometimes happens. I think I've done some demonstrations where I wiped away my config, and that's totally fine. Like, I'm okay with it. But basically, did it right? Did I type it right? I may have. Then you're good to go. Sometimes that happens. Are we good? That's everything we've done already. So please download that one now. I think I'll wait for you guys to do that for a second. If you download my example, and we should start from here, right? Because I think I've got everything working. The way to test that, that everything is working is if I was to load my thing again, if I go light server and I run my file one more time, right? So let's just kill this one. And if I look at if I inspect, you can see in my console that these two things are happening. My app initializing and app started is running. So I initialize in my start, and then I start in my main, right? And by the way, there's one other way we can do this. I can have three main functions. One is an init function that I initialize, I preload in my init. I start stuff in my main, initialize stuff, and then I start stuff in my start, and then I actually start my application in my main. All right, those are the three things. I might have 2 or 3. I'm using 2 here. I have all this big space, and I put this in as an example to make it so you can see that this is a scrolling page. And I also want to do so from a mobile perspective. You can see what it would look like, right? Because we want to be mobile first, right? Here's our mobile first page, right? Is that a question? Yeah, tell me.
They can have a menu scroll up. That's when
this thing appears. Yeah. You can do that too.
So it is like more of a combination with the JavaScript.
Yeah, and what they do with that is if you scroll up, then you activate the scrolling, and depending on how far you scroll, then it activates the toolbar comes up, or the hamburger, that part that has the menu, comes up too.
So it's
You can activate it through JavaScript for sure. Yes, and you can also do other things with Bootstrap. Remember, Bootstrap is, you can customize it to your heart's delight, right? So, are we good with this part right now? I think you should all be good at this point. All I'm doing is I'm just waiting for you guys to download it. So please, we can follow along. And this is going to be our template again for the second half of semester. I'm not going to use the original one for a couple of reasons. One, we're not using yarn in the original one, and two, I want to do this again with you because I want you to see template build yet again for those people who didn't see it the first time. I know people missed class. Too bad Junior wasn't here today because he missed it the first time, and he missed it again this time. But is he here today? Have you seen him? Anyway, so hopefully he's okay. But yeah, he missed it a couple times in a row, and that's why I wanted to kind of have a chance to do it again for you guys, just in case you missed it the first time, right? All right, so yeah, we have our OOP template, but we haven't done anything. I'm going to get rid of all this paragraph text. This is just for us testing. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of that. So I'm going to go to my index.html. And there's long paragraph text that I kind of dropped in there in here. I'm just going to get rid of that. That's really just for test. I just use this for testing. So kind of inside my paragraph, and get rid of those 2 paragraph elements and save the file. And now you can see that I just have this. So no paragraph. All right, so I want to do some objects. And the first thing we talk about with object is object notation. Now, I'm not going to follow the PowerPoint example right now. Okay, so please bear with me. We're going to get to the PowerPoint stuff later. All right. But when we go into our JavaScript file, so I'm going to go back into my JavaScript. Again, it's inside scripts, in this case, inside app.js, right? So in my app.js, I'm just going to close this off for now. You can see that I have my start and my main. Okay, so in my space up here, underneath my function, I may have some app variables. Okay, so here's our app variables that I might share with some other modules that I write. Okay, I don't have any app variables right now, but we're going to make some. Okay, and one of the variables that I want to create with you, right, is some kind of object that we want to fool around with, right? So we're going to say let my object, right, is just equal to an object for now. Okay, so this is an object literal. So this is one way of defining an object. When we say these curly braces are basically is a way of doing it. If I hover over this, you can say that my object is now an object that can contain other stuff. It's like it says here, it's gray because I never used it. I just defined my object. Now that I know that this is here, I could also do it this way. So this is one way of doing it. I could do this, and inside my start method where I want to do my definitions, right, I could do my object, right, is equal to an object. I could do that too. I like this notation more because I don't want to. I just want to declare my variables up here, right, and I want to define what they are in here, in my start. So again, declaration up here, definition in here, right? Or assignment, if you will. Hey, this is my way of doing it. You may disagree, right? And eventually you will. You'll have your own style. This is my style, right? Here's why I kind of like this color. It's kind of cool because it shows you the color of these things a little bit clearer. And when I didn't have this, then it was kind of very monotone, monocolor. I'm not really good with that. I like coloration of my text. Color coding is good for our eyes, right? Now, unless you have a colorblind thing or whatever, you can't see them, then there's no help. But it's not a hindrance either, or shouldn't be. All right. So again, so this, you notice that this is any now. Notice that here it's any, but here you can see that it's still any. Whereas before, when I defined it up here, it knew that it was an object in here. Okay, so two ways of doing things. If I was to do this, my object, and then in main, right, I want a console log. Let's see what it does. So I want to do console log in main, and I'll kind of print out my object. Like, what is that? What does it give me? And if I was to go and just do my object like this, and if I go out, you can see that it's still an object, right? Still figures it out at the end. How come? Because we started here as my object. We went inside of start. It defined it as an object. And then back in main, it still lives, right? Why is it living here? Because we defined it out here, right? This is, let's talk about this as a local scope for this module, this core module. My object is now in the local scope, not global scope. Global scope would be out here. Core is in the global scope because it's outside of this closure, right? This is the closure. This is the iffy, right? So we're just going to put this in here. We'll say, core closure. That's what this is, right? Starting right here. We'll just put this actually. I'm not liking that. My formatter's not liking that. I'll put that here. We could also call this as our iffy. Right, immediately invoke function expression. That's what this is, right? I remember there's another way to write this with ES6 with fat arrow. We're not going to do that today. Okay, so here's our core closure, right, or module. Let's rename this to module because that's what it really is, our core module, right? And inside of our core module, in the module space or in our local space, local function space, this is where this is, my object. Up here, this is global space. Right, because outside of the function. Okay, so inside anything in here is in my app, like my object. All right, so I want to define. Typically, what you have is objects in Java, in C# and in Java have properties and methods. Yeah, I'm not talking about classes. We're just talking about the end object. This is where JavaScript is different. I'm not defining a class, am I? I'm just automatically have an object container. That's the difference between JavaScript right away and C#. C# can't really do this, right? Not the same way. All right, so here's my object. And now I want to make I want to define some properties of the object. I could say my object dot, and whatever property I want. For example, I'm going to define a person. So the person is going to have a name property, right? And I can assign it something by default. I have to give it an assignment for it to be good. It doesn't know what it is. I can't just say my object.name. I can't do that, right? And I can't use a let. I can't say let my object.name. I can't do that either. But I can do this. This is one way of doing it, right? So an empty string. And I could say my object.age is equal to a number, right? I could do that too, right? So I could do this. And now if I look at what I get from my object, right? I see that I got name and age. And if I look into it, I can see that I have that. Age is 0. And my name, notice it came in alphabetical order, not the way I described it, right? Name and age. Age, 0, name, string, right? And if I hover over it, you can see now that it doesn't really give it a type, right? So here's my age and name, right? And it wouldn't, because it's just kind of saying, well, this name property is part of my object. Okay, so this is one way of doing it. Other way, so this is part one. The other way is using the new keyword, new object. Okay, by the way, same result.
We've done that a lot.
Right? So this or the other way, same. Okay, new object, and this is an empty object. That's what this does. This is the super object, if you will, superclass. Yes.
Do we have JavaScript?
We do. This is using constructor notation, right? So this is constructor notation. And the other one, my object, is equal to this, is, we'll call this object. I'm going to put this in actually, I'll just do this, because I don't want to use this one. I want to use this way. This is object literal notation. Okay. I'm just put this in place here so you can see it. I'm not going to use this way. Let me use this way. Just like I wouldn't use new array. Remember we said new, you can make an array, square brackets, or you can make an array with new. There's different effects to both things. When you use constructor notation, you're actually inheriting from the object prototype, right? Here, I'm just using an empty object container with no prototype. There is another way to do it.
Okay, so custom constructor.
Well, here's another way to do it, okay? So my object, actually, so this object is good, right? And I could do this. I could say object, capital O, which is a class. The object class dot create, right? And if I open it up, it looks at object, right? It does this, right? And notice that object to use as a prototype may be null, right? So object.create, right? And I'm going to refer back to this. Notice there's two overloads where it says these arrows. It gives you the overloads. So this is one overload. And then there's also properties, right? Properties that this object has, right? So if I want to use object.create, if I put null, right? And if I said that my object is equal to this, right? And if I just comment that out for a second, right? What does this do? Does it work? Same. So there's three ways of doing it. This way, or this way, right? All of them are different, right? All of them have different effects. Okay. And how do I know this? Well, when you open it up, notice what's different here. I open this one up with this way of doing it, object.create null, and I just get age and name. If I do it this way, so if this is object.create null, I get this, age and name. If I do it this way, if I just comment this one out and uncomment this one, and I open this up, now I get a different thing. Age, name, and proto, right? Which has all this stuff. So what does this do? What this one does is it gives me the proto is the superclass, right? Is object, the object superclass. So in fact, this way is cleaner because it has no prototype attached to it. Okay? How about this way? So this way is one way. I told you I want to use this way. The other way is this way. So we talk this new one. What does this one give us? Look, it's going to look very similar. Okay? Proto object. Okay? So both ways, whether it's curly braces or the new, gives us this prototype object. The new keyword is deceptive, though, because we're not making a new object from nowhere. We want to make our own class, right? So this would be the cleanest way to create it. For now, we're going to start with this, because this is the most common way you'll see it. All right, and that's why I want to start with this one. Not because I don't want to do it this way. These two are equivalent, right? But the first way is the most common way, and that's why we're going to stick with it for now. And we'll talk about the other way later. And what this hell does this object.create mean? You want to know more? You can read ahead. I recommend reading ahead by going to object. And if you notice that the object, this is the document that I showed you. There is the create protocol. And if you look at it, it says method creates a new object using an existing object to provide a newly created object's prototype, right? However, if I use null, I'm saying don't use any prototype object. This is like there is no prototype object to use. So advantages and disadvantages to this. Okay, with this method, we have to do a lot more work, all right? Because I have to create the prototype, I have to create all that stuff, and then move from there, right? If I'm making a super duper class, I may want to use this way of doing it. Like if I make a new person class, I may want to start like this, right? Talk about this. This is a great way, by using object.create, that is the way we use inheritance, all right? All right, so this is the way we can do it. And this is the way we can define properties. But there's a better way, which I recommend. A more thorough way, I think is the right way to do it. This is one way of doing it. I'm just going to comment this out, right? Because this is kind of property definition. Here's property definition. Actually, I won't put anything in there because I may uncomment this in a second. But this is one way of doing property definition. I'll just put another comment in here. So property definition. Right? The other way to do it is using this object.define property. All right? So remember, object, I want you to think of it this way. The keyword object here, so down here where I said object.create, this keyword object, it's the object super duper duper class that exists in almost any language you learn, right? In Java, C#. Object is this super object that all other objects kind of are inherited from, okay? The root class or the super duper class, whatever you want to call it, it's the one that everything else inherits from. But the root class is a good way of knowing or kind of talking about it. So if I use the object keyword or the object class and I say define property, right? That's the other way of doing it. Okay, let's talk about define property a little bit. So when I define property, I can list the object that I want to define the property for. All right. So in other words, I'm going to use my object, right? And my object, I'm going to have two properties, right? So this is the name of the property, name, right? And then I'm going to have a bunch of attributes for the property. Now this is different. So I'm going to kind of put these attributes in here. All right. So name is in this case, this first string is the name of the property. In this case, it's going to be called name. If I was going to make the other property, it'd be called age. All right, we'll do that one too. So notice that define property says which object I'm defining a property for my object, right? In this case, right? What's the name of the property? In our case, it's name, right? You can make whatever name you want in there, right? And now we have a bunch of other things that I want to talk about that are in here. One of them, if I go back to this, there's another little example here. So one is inheritance and the other one is this one. If you look at object.define property, okay, notice that it says my object, my property, and there's some other stuff, value, writable, and a bunch of other stuff. If you go down to here, you see all the different descriptions for everything. So here's one, configurable. That is a property I want to kind of set up. I can say, is my property configurable? And what does configurable mean? It means it returns true if and only if the type of this property can be changed, right? Or if I want to delete this property, do I want to be able to delete this property from my class? If the answer is I never want to be able to delete this property, then the answer should be false. And by default, configurable is false. Let's be explicit though. So in this case, explicit means I want to type configurable, right? And I'm going to say false. Okay, that's my first. Notice this is inside of a curly brace. I'm defining my property, right? My attributes for my property. The other one is enumerable. Enumerable means can I loop through it? Can I loop over this property? Can I make a property that I want to loop through? And if I do want to make it enumerable, by default, by the way, it's false. But if I do want to make this property loopable, right, then I want to make this true. Let's make our enumerable for now false. True, we'll make it later. So false, right? So it's false. Then the next one is value. Do I want to assign a value, initial value to my property? I don't have to. Otherwise, by default, is undefined. I want to do this undefined because my property might be different. My name might be different for everybody. I don't want it to have a value. If I assign a value, it will use type inference to determine what my value is. So in our case, if I want to, I can say that my value, right, is equal to this, like we did before, right? So that means my value now is a string type, right? Because My property now is going to be a string type because I've assigned an empty value to it. All right, and then there's writable. Writable. True if and only if I can write to my property. By default, it's false. Well, I think that's a read-only. Read. If I make it false, then I can only read from the property. I can't write to the property. A read-only property, right? Here I want to make it true, right? So I want to say writable, right? So configurable false, enumerable false for now. Vault value, I give it a value. Writable is true, right? Okay, a couple of other things. There's the get and set. Okay, this is interesting. These are two little functions that I can set up to say what my get and set, if I want to set or get, like this is like how deep we're going to get here, where I can determine when I get or set the property, what happens. Okay, so how do I do that? I do this. I say get. I define it as a function, right? Just hear me out here, right? And the function itself has some kind of thing. When I get something, what do I want to do, right? I want to return the value, right? That's what I want to do. I will return some value, whatever the value is, right? In this case, whatever the value is, I want to return this, the value of this property, right? And I could, if you notice the get and setter, the getter and setter here, we're going to come back to this in a second, but I want to return something, right? I could also return a value, like I got to return some value. This value keyword is what I want to do, right? So if I put value in there, it doesn't really have any value. Value is kind of undefined, right? So let's leave value in there. And then I'm going to put a comma for now. I'm going to put set, my function, my set function. And I want to kind of have some new value, right? That's what I'm going to pass into the function. Where my new value by default, as an example, is going to have return is going to set the value. So I'm going to say that, this dot, name as an example, this value, right? This dot name, which is what this is equal to new value, right? It's almost like I want to return this dot name. That's what I want to do, because this dot name is going to be what this thing is going to be called, name, right? I want to kind of do this, but I want to do this in the right way. All right, so you notice that these are the configurable pieces, right? From this curly brace on. I'm just going to put this curly brace down here. I'm going to put this curly brace, this thing down here, of my defined property. Does that make sense? Saving, it's just rejigging it for me when I save, right? So you can see it, enumerable, and it's kind of does this get and set differently. So what does this mean? How does this work? This name property, right? And by the way, I want to do the same thing. I'm just going to copy paste. I'm going to take this whole thing. I'm going to do the same thing here. And instead of name, we'll call this age, and my value instead of a string will be 0. Right? And I'm going to return this dot age, and this dot age is equal to new value, right? I'm just showing you the long way, so so you understand and you've seen the long way, because people will never teach you this, right? Because most times you won't need to do this, right? But I want you to understand what's happening in the background. This is what's happening in the background. Yes. Oh, I just did this. I just did the age. So I just changed value and age. Now this isn't right, but we're going to come back to this. This idea is right, but this isn't right. Not yet. Okay, we said that, we'll see if this is right. If it's right, then inside of our code, if I go here, then we're going to have a problem. But here we have an issue. It says that uncut type error, invalid property descriptor, cannot both specify accessors and a value or writable attribute. Can't do that. Like I can't refer to the attribute itself, which is what I'm doing, right? Can't do this, which I knew when I wrote this, right? But this is kind of what I want to do, right, with my getter and setter, right? If you look at the example, and this is the most important part, it says, it gives you an idea of this, all right? So here is a couple of objects. This is right in the document that I share with you already, right? So if you don't remember it, it's okay. So here's the object. Notice they define an object this way, right? And then it declared a descriptor with object create null. It's almost like another object that's inside. The actual descriptor itself, right, is an object that they're including in here. So that's the descriptor, right? Object. You don't have to do that way. Enumerable, configurable, writable, and a value, whatever you want to put in there. And then you can see that here is some other stuff you can do where you can define other variables inside the value, another little function, and so on. You can do this kind of stuff as much as you want. Here's a good example of a descriptor. And on the bottom, notice that they do this object.phrase or object, and then object prototype inside of this closure. That's what they're really doing. And here's some good other examples here. Here's your getter and setter. Here's something. So I say, well, here's my object, define property for my object. I have O, and my object is called B. My property is called B, right? And then I said get so I've got all this enumerable, configurable stuff. And in here, I've defined my getter and setter up here. And my getter for this thing is return B value. Where does B value come from, right? And then setter, and then here's B value. And then there's the new value, whatever the new value is, right? Well, remember, what I'm really doing here is defining properties, right? Whereas B value up here is an actual a variable of type, right? And then I'm saying we'll return B value, right? So here I'm returning an actual value. Here's my value, and I can return whatever the value is. I can do this too, right? I'm just going to give you some more examples here where I want to return stuff, right? But it's almost like I'm going to return the value itself. Okay, so that's what I want to do. Now, here, these functions are pretty much useless. But let's suppose that I had these two private variables, because typically what we do in classical inheritance is define the difference between public and private. We have private variables that we keep for the object itself that keeps track of the data. And we have the public variables that allow us to read and write from that data to expose whatever the private function is. So we can use the other property definition, right? And by the way, going back to this example up here, or the documentation, notice that it says a get and set, a function which serves a getter for the property, or undefined if there's no getter. When the property is accessed, this function is called without arguments, and with this set to the object through which the property is accessed. This may not be the object on which property is defined due to inheritance. The return value will be used as the value of the property. So whatever the function is going to be, right? So if I don't define it, it's undefined by default. So if I was to just take these before I do anything else, if I took these out, let's just take these out. So I said, okay, I don't want any kind of getter or setter. Before I do this, I'm going to kind of do one of these and just comment this part out, both, just to see the difference between one and the other. I'll do the same thing with this one. Okay, so just going to use the comma here, so there's no error. Otherwise, we'll have a weird error. If I did this, I just did configurable, enumerable, value, and writable, right? And go back up to here. You can see now I have no issues, and I have these two properties like before. Exactly the same. Okay, what about, can I do something with them? That's the other thing. Can I use them, right? And so I've defined them here, and now in main, I'm going to use them, right? So I'm going to say something like, well, you know, instead of console log my object, let's do some stuff. Right? I'm going to say something like, well, you know, my object dot name is equal to Tom. Can I do that, right? And if I save this here in main, and if I go back out, do you see now that I have Tom, right? So by default, the default setter or getter allows me to do this, sign, right? And notice I cannot access this property from the console. It's not available because it's inside of core, and core is an empty object right now. I haven't really defined anything in there, right? So from the outside the code, you can't do anything here. I can't rewrite this or whatever. And same thing with my object name. So my object.age, I can say is 49, right? And then when I go back, I can see now that I have Tom and 49, right, as values. So very simple, okay? Okay, now what about if I add this back in, and instead of having these two objects, right? So I have these two as name and age. Let's add a couple of more objects. One of them is going to be called underscore name, and the other one is called underscore age. Can I do that? Hear me out. So here's my object. I'll copy these two things. Okay, and put these up here. Again, this, I know it's a long, protracted example, but please forgive me. So I'll put this as name, and this one as age. And by the way, in my code, whenever I code, this is my own coding standard, underscore means private. Okay? Some other languages, you might have P underscore or M underscore. M underscore means a member variable, right? And the type, M underscore S, or, you know, name, or whatever, string. M underscore M means, you know, member variable, and then S means string. I don't know. Everyone has different ways of doing things. For me, I'm just going to use the underscore variable, the underscore keyword or key as this. I don't need this stuff because I'm not going to make a configure, a getter or setter in this case. So I'm going to get rid of all this. That's why I did it this way, right? Name and age. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a getter and setter for these ones. I'm going to say, okay, so this like my traditional way of doing it in classical inheritance. Instead of this dot name, I'm going to say this dot underscore name, and this dot underscore name is equal to new value. Let's see if this works, right? This is what I want to do, because I want to stick to is the classical inheritance way as much as I can, right? Because that's what we know, we understand. And this dot underscore age, so I'm modifying another variable, right, is equal to new value. I'm going to be able to do that when I get and set. We good? You don't understand? So here's get and set. These get and set variables. This underscore name is it should modify this one, this property up here. This property is the private property. So think about this as a private property. So private property is not really private, by the way. I can access the underscore as well, right? And private properties, we'll say private properties. This is the idea that we're trying to set up. It's almost like a format, all right? And this is public, like in C#. This is the kind of idea. We want to use our public name and age, and we're going to set underscore age and underscore name with them, all right? When we get them, when I use a get value. In this case, do I need the value here? No, I don't need this. And I don't need this. I'm not going to preset my values because I'm going to get them from my age and name. That's what it's going to be, right? Save. Let's see if this works. Okay, again, we have a bit of a problem, right? Why is this? Well, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to access, when I say the keyword name, this dot name, this dot underscore name, this is the object, this, and there isn't an object this here, but this is the idea. Remember I talked about the idea? This is the idea that we want. We want this functionality, right? How about if I did, instead of this, if I just said underscore name, does that work? And remember, JavaScript is not giving us an error right now because it's saying, I don't know what you mean, right? When I use this keyword. Okay, just bear with me. So here, try this. And is this right? Right, because I want to kind of stick to kind of a C# static. And again, it says that uncut type error, invalid property descriptor cannot both specify accessors and a value or writable attribute at the same time. Okay, so it says writable. That's kind of weird. Why do we have writable attributes? So let's get rid of the attribute. It says writable is no good, right? Can't do the accessors and the writable attribute at the same time. Okay, so let's get rid of attribute. Okay. Now we have this, age and name, and we have get age, get name, set name. Take a look. So what does this do? How the heck do we use this thing, this format of doing things, right? And we're going to get back to the this keyword in a second. So down in here, instead of my name is equal to Tom and my age is equal to 49, right? So this is interesting. Well, what does age and name equal to? Well, look, guess what happens. So age is 0 and name is nothing. Okay, cool. But we said that somehow we tried to set and get and set, and that didn't quite work, right? We have a length of 1. Here's our getter and setter, and it kind of created all this structure for us. Well, here's something. It says it's a function prototype. That's what we're creating. It's all this extra stuff, and we still didn't get the result. Okay, let's try putting this back and see what happens now that we've got the writable away. We took care of the writable. Let's put this dot. That's why we want to kind of access the writable was the issue. Will this cause a problem? Okay. That's more what we want, right? So you can see now that we have age is 49 and Tom is equal to Tom, but age and name are nothing. They still have the values, but they're not really being assigned. What we really want is this age or name. So back on the back end, age underscore age, which is our private variable, and underscore name, which is our other private variable, are being kind of set in this particular case, if that makes any sense. So is age and name. So age and name are the public face of our variables. This is the way we did it in C#, right, and in Java. And then age and name are our private part of our variables. Private part, public part. This is properties, not member variables. Our member variables are age and name. Our properties are age and name. Underscore means private. Does it make sense? Maybe it doesn't, right? And we've run out of time for today. But I want to leave you with this idea of different ways of defining properties. And we have a property definition method. First, we use the object.define property and set the property we want to define. My object is the object we want to define. We did it this way last time, right? This is the simple way. You're like, hey, wait, how come we just not do it this way, right? Because this does all this, by the way, all right? But I wanted to show you in the background, if you want real control of your properties, you can configure them any way you like, right? Any questions around the first part of OO for Java? We're going to go back into this more tomorrow. And tomorrow what we're going to talk about is, hey, how do I add a function to this? How do I want to use a method. I want to create a method as part of my object. How do I do that? And then we'll talk about how to create a constructor. Okay? Any questions? All right. I'm going to put this up on GitHub. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Most of my issue was just I didn't see Billy when you were leaving.
Sorry.
Towards the end there. It's okay. I figured it out.